A brand new American car used to mean one thing: you had made it. A factory worker could own one. A plumber could own one. A young family buying their very first home could park one in the driveway. It wasn't a luxury. It was simply what happened when ordinary Americans worked hard. Today, that same dream often carries a price tag approaching an entire year's income. Most people shrug and say, well, everything is more expensive now. But what if that's not the real reason? Because something doesn't add up. Detroit, the city that once put America on wheels, never stopped building cars. Its factories are still running. Its engineers never disappeared. Its assembly lines can still produce millions of vehicles. The industrial machine that once helped build America's middle class is still one of the most powerful manufacturing ecosystems in the world. So why do affordable American cars seem harder to find than ever? Maybe Americans stopped wanting them. Maybe regulations made them impossible. Maybe foreign competition destroyed Detroit. Or maybe none of those answers tell the whole story. Because Detroit didn't lose the ability to build affordable cars. Somewhere along the way, it simply stopped choosing to. The question is no longer, why are cars so expensive? The real question is, who changed Detroit? When a car meant you had made it. Imagine it's 1956. A young man finishes another shift at a factory outside Detroit. His hands are covered in grease. His back aches. But today is different. Instead of driving home, he turns into a Ford dealership. He isn't shopping for luxury. He isn't comparing touchscreen sizes. He isn't calculating an 84-month loan. He's buying his family's first brand new car. And somehow, that feels completely normal. Today, it feels almost impossible. How did something so ordinary become so out of reach? For much of the 20th century, the automobile wasn't simply transportation. It was America's greatest economic ladder. Henry Ford had proven that mass production could lower prices enough for ordinary workers to become customers. The people building cars could actually afford to buy them. That single idea transformed the country. Factories expanded. Roads stretched farther across America. New suburbs appeared almost overnight. Owning a car no longer symbolized wealth. It symbolized opportunity. Young couples could move farther from crowded cities. Veterans returning from World War II could build new lives. Small businesses could reach new customers. The automobile became the engine behind the American dream. Detroit wasn't just manufacturing vehicles. It was manufacturing upward mobility. For decades, this system worked remarkably well. Generation after generation expected one simple milestone: graduate, find a steady job, buy your first American car. No one questioned whether that dream would still exist for their children. But dreams don't disappear overnight. They disappear one decision at a time. And before Detroit stopped building affordable cars, it became something much bigger than an automobile industry. The factory that built America. Long before Detroit became famous for expensive pickup trucks, it earned a very different reputation. There was a time when the city wasn't simply building transportation, it was building America's future. Then, the world went to war. Almost overnight, family sedans disappeared from assembly lines. In their place came something entirely different. President Franklin Roosevelt called Detroit the arsenal of democracy, and the nickname wasn't an exaggeration. Ford's Willow Run factory began producing B-24 bombers at astonishing speed. General Motors shifted toward military engines. armored vehicles, and countless components. Chrysler operated the Detroit Arsenal tank plant, producing thousands of tanks for Allied forces. Factories that had once built cars for young families suddenly became factories helping supply a global war. Washington trusted Detroit because almost no other place on Earth could match its industrial capabilities. Mass production, complex logistics, gigantic supply chains, precision manufacturing. When America needed industrial strength, it looked toward Detroit. That capability never disappeared. Even today, Detroit remains one of America's most valuable manufacturing centers. The machines changed, the products evolved, but the industrial knowledge remained, which creates a strange paradox. Detroit never forgot how to build. It simply changed what it wanted to build. Most people assume that happened because executives became greedy, but greed wasn't where this story began. Before Wall Street, there was a crisis. It's easy to blame CEOs. It's even easier to blame corporate greed. And eventually, those forces would absolutely reshape Detroit. But they weren't the first domino to fall. The real story started decades before billion-dollar executive bonuses dominated the headlines. It started with fear. Fear that America had built the wrong kind of automobile. The oil crises of the 1970s changed everything. Gas stations ran dry. Drivers waited in long lines, hoping fuel trucks would arrive. Suddenly, the enormous V8-powered American cars that had once symbolized success became expensive burdens. Meanwhile, Japanese automakers were arriving with something Detroit had underestimated: smaller cars, better fuel economy, remarkable reliability. For the first time in generations, Detroit wasn't leaving the market, it was chasing it. Then came stricter safety requirements, cleaner emission standards, fuel economy regulations. Each change made sense on its own. Together, they forced every American automaker to rethink how cars were designed and manufactured. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Government regulations made cars more expensive. Case closed. Except there's one enormous problem with that explanation. If regulations alone destroyed affordable American cars, how did Toyota, Honda, and later Hyundai continue selling affordable vehicles, while Detroit gradually walked away from them? Clearly, someone else was changing the rules of the game. And the biggest shift wasn't happening inside a factory. It was happening inside the boardroom. The loophole nobody saw. By the late 1970s, Detroit faced a choice: keep fighting to build affordable cars, or build something far more profitable. Most people assume consumers made that decision. They didn't. A legal definition did. When Congress introduced fuel economy standards, lawmakers created separate rules for passenger cars and light trucks. At the time, it made perfect sense. Pickup trucks were work tools. Farmers used them. Construction crews depended on them. No one imagined suburban families would eventually drive them to shopping malls. Then another law quietly reshaped the market: the chicken tax. A 25% tariff on imported light trucks dramatically reduced foreign competition in America's truck market. Suddenly, Detroit discovered something few consumers ever noticed. A vehicle classified as a truck faced different regulations, less foreign competition, and often delivered much higher profits. That loophole changed everything. SUVs became larger. Pickup trucks became more luxurious. Families who once bought sedans were encouraged to buy vehicles originally designed for work. It wasn't because Americans suddenly needed bigger vehicles. It was because bigger vehicles made far more money. Detroit had found a new formula for success. But the biggest transformation wasn't happening in the factory. It was happening inside the balance sheet. The day Detroit changed its customer. For most of the 20th century, Detroit competed for one thing: more drivers. The company that sold the most cars usually won. But sometime during the 1980s and 1990s, that definition quietly changed. The customer sitting in the driver's seat became less important than the investor watching quarterly earnings. Wall Street rewarded growth. Then it rewarded margins even more. A basic compact sedan might earn only a modest profit. A fully loaded pickup truck or luxury SUV could generate several times as much. From a shareholder's perspective, selling one expensive truck often made more sense than selling several affordable cars. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Executives didn't stop caring about vehicles. They simply started optimizing for different results. Marketing changed with them. Pickup trucks became symbols of freedom, luxury, adventure, status. Every year they grew larger, more powerful, more expensive. Meanwhile, affordable cars quietly received fewer updates, less investment, and eventually disappeared altogether. Detroit hadn't stopped building vehicles. It had changed who those vehicles were designed to satisfy. Then came the greatest crisis the industry had faced in generations. America saved Detroit. In 2008, it looked as though Detroit might not survive at all. The financial crisis crushed car sales. Factories slowed, dealerships emptied. America's largest automakers stood on the edge of collapse. For a moment, the city that had built the American dream seemed ready to disappear. Executives traveled to Washington asking for help. Congress debated whether Detroit deserved saving. In the end, the US government stepped in. Billions of dollars helped stabilize the industry. The argument wasn't simply about cars. It was about millions of jobs, thousands of suppliers, entire communities built around manufacturing. Detroit received a second chance. Executives promised a new beginning: smarter products, better decisions, a stronger future. For a while, many Americans believed the lesson had been learned. But over the next decade, something unexpected happened. Ford ended the Focus, then the Fusion. General Motors walked away from the Cruze, the Impala, and later the Malibu. Affordable sedans disappeared, one after another. SUVs expanded, pickup trucks dominated, luxury trims multiplied. Detroit had survived, but the affordable American car had not. Why would an industry rescued by ordinary taxpayers slowly stop building vehicles those same taxpayers could afford? The promise Detroit couldn't keep. Detroit promised to build the cars America needed. Instead, it built the vehicles that generated the highest returns. Walk into a dealership today. You'll find rows of towering SUVs, luxury pickups, premium packages, massive touchscreens, leather interiors, off-road editions that may never leave pavement. The basic family car has quietly become an afterthought. Something much bigger disappeared with it. For generations, a first car represented independence, a teenager's first job, a young couple's first road trip, a small contractor's first business. Affordable transportation wasn't just another product, it expanded opportunity. Every time the price of entry rises, someone is left behind. Today, many young Americans delay buying their first vehicle. Some stretch loans across 7 or even 8 years. Others keep aging cars alive because replacing them simply isn't realistic. The automobile still exists. Affordable ownership does not. And that's what makes the next chapter so difficult to ignore. Detroit never actually lost the ability to build. The factories never forgot. Here's the irony. The factories are still there. The engineers are still there. The supply chains still exist. The manufacturing knowledge never disappeared. Whenever America discusses rebuilding industrial capacity, Detroit remains part of that conversation. Why? Because the city still possesses something incredibly valuable: mass production, advanced robotics, precision manufacturing, global supply chain management, industrial logistics. The same capabilities that once helped earn Detroit the title Arsenal of Democracy continue to make it strategically important today. This isn't a city that forgot how to build. It's a city that learned to build according to different priorities. Which finally brings us back to the question we've been asking since the beginning. Who changed Detroit? Was it Washington? Corporate executives? Wall Street? Foreign competition? The answer is both simpler and more unsettling. Who really changed Detroit? Throughout this story, we've searched for a single villain, someone to blame, one decision, one law, one CEO. But real history rarely works that way. Detroit wasn't transformed by one person. It was reshaped by an entire system. A system that rewarded profit margins over affordability, quarterly earnings over long-term loyalty, premium vehicles over accessible transportation. Every individual decision made business sense. Together, they slowly changed the mission of an industry. Detroit didn't lose the ability to build affordable cars. It lost the incentive. And that's why one small startup, like Slate, has attracted so much attention. Not because it has already changed the industry. It hasn't. But because hundreds of thousands of people responded to one surprisingly simple promise: an affordable truck. Repairable, practical, built for ordinary Americans. Maybe Americans never stopped wanting affordable cars. Maybe Detroit stopped believing they were worth building. Because in the end, the greatest thing Detroit didn't lose wasn't its factories. It was the ability to choose what those factories were built for.